18 years. That is how long Jesus Christ disappears from the biblical record. From the age of 12 to the age of 30, the most influential person in human history leaves almost no trace in the text that bears his name. One moment he is a boy in the temple, astonishing the scholars with his understanding. The next he is a 30-year-old man walking into the Jordan River to be baptized by John. Everything between those two moments is silence. And that silence has driven people mad with curiosity for 2,000 years. Where did he go? What did he learn? Who taught him? Did he travel to India? Did he study with the Essenes? Did he visit Egypt as a student, not just as a refugee child? The theories number in the hundreds, and some of them have been used to rewrite the entire story of Christianity. But when you look at the actual evidence, both biblical and historical, a very different picture emerges. And what it reveals is not a gap in the story. It is the deepest cipher in the life of Christ. Let us start with what Scripture actually tells us. The last glimpse of Jesus before his ministry begins is in Luke chapter 2, verses 41 through 52. Every year, Joseph and Mary go to Jerusalem for the Passover feast. When Jesus is 12 years old, the family travels up as usual. After the feast, the caravan departs. Joseph and Mary assume Jesus is among the travelers, likely with the other children in the group. After a day's journey, they realize he is not with them. They search among their relatives and acquaintances. He is nowhere to be found. They return to Jerusalem and search for 3 days. On the third day, they find him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. His mother says to him, "Son, why have you treated us so? Your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." And Jesus replies, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" They did not understand what he meant. Then he went down with them to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. That is the last recorded event of his childhood. The next time he appears in Scripture is Luke chapter 3, verse 23. Jesus, when he began his ministry, was about 30 years of age. 18 years of the most significant life ever lived, and the Bible gives us one sentence. He increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. That is it. No travel logs, no diary entries, no descriptions of his 20s, just silence. And into that silence, people have poured every theory imaginable. The most popular theory is that Jesus traveled to India during the lost years. This idea claims that between the ages of 12 and 30, Jesus journeyed east along the Silk Road, studied under Hindu and Buddhist teachers, learned meditation and healing techniques, and then returned to Palestine to begin his ministry. The theory points to similarities between the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of Buddha, especially the emphasis on compassion, non-violence, and detachment from material wealth. Some versions of this theory claim Jesus visited Buddhist monasteries in Ladakh, in what is now northern India, and there are even alleged ancient texts in the Essenes monastery that reference a saint named Issa, which is the Arabic name for Jesus. This theory was popularized in the late 19th century by a Russian journalist named Nicholas Notovich, who claimed to have discovered these manuscripts during a visit to the Essenes monastery in 1887. He published a book called The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ, which became an international sensation. But there is a problem. When scholars went to verify Notovich's claims, the monastery had no record of the manuscripts. The abbot denied their existence. Several prominent scholars who visited the monastery afterward, including Max Muller and J. Archibald Douglas, found no trace of any such document. Notovich himself later confessed to friends that he had fabricated the story. The Essenes manuscripts do not exist. They never did. The India theory, while romantic, has no historical evidence behind it. Another theory claims Jesus traveled to Britain with Joseph of Arimathea, who is described in the Gospels as a wealthy member of the council and a secret disciple of Jesus. According to legend, Joseph of Arimathea was a tin merchant with trade connections to Cornwall, and some stories claim he brought the young Jesus to Britain during his teenage years. This theory is deeply embedded in English folklore and is connected to the Glastonbury traditions. William Blake's famous poem, "And did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green," is a direct reference to this idea. But again, there is no historical evidence. No Roman records mention Jesus in Britain. No archaeological findings connect him to Cornwall or Glastonbury. The tradition first appears in medieval texts, written more than 1,000 years after the events they describe. It is a beautiful legend, but it is not history. A third theory suggests Jesus spent the lost years with the Essenes, a Jewish sect that lived in communities near the Dead Sea, most famously at Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947. The Essenes practiced ritual baptism, communal meals, strict obedience to the Torah, and apocalyptic prophecy. Some scholars have noted parallels between Essene practices and early Christian rituals. John the Baptist, in particular, is often linked to the Essenes because of his ascetic lifestyle, his location in the wilderness near the Dead Sea, and his practice of baptism. The theory suggests that Jesus may have been educated by the Essenes or even lived among them for a period. But there are significant problems with this theory as well. The Essenes were extremely strict about ritual purity. They separated themselves from mainstream Jewish society. They practiced strict Sabbath observance, rigid dietary laws, and a hierarchical community structure. Jesus, by contrast, regularly associated with sinners and tax collectors. He healed on the Sabbath. He criticized rigid interpretations of the law. His teaching style and his ministry practices are fundamentally different from Essene patterns. If Jesus had spent years with the Essenes, it would be strange for his public ministry to systematically contradict their core values. A fourth theory suggests Jesus traveled to Egypt during the lost years, not as a child fleeing Herod, which is recorded in Matthew chapter 2, but as a young man studying Egyptian mystery traditions, magic, or Hellenistic philosophy. This theory draws on the fact that Egypt was a center of learning in the ancient world, with the Library of Alexandria and numerous philosophical schools. But the Gospels of Matthew and Luke both indicate that Jesus grew up in Nazareth after the family returned from Egypt when he was very young. There is no biblical or historical evidence that Jesus returned to Egypt as an adult before his ministry. And the theory relies on the assumption that Jesus needed to learn his miracles from some external source, which contradicts the consistent biblical portrayal of Jesus as possessing inherent divine authority rather than acquired skill. So if he did not go to India, Britain, Qumran, or Egypt, where was he? The answer is far less exotic and far more profound than any of these theories. He was in Nazareth, working. The single most important clue to the lost years is one word in the Greek text of the Gospels. In Mark chapter 6, verse 3, when Jesus returns to his hometown and begins teaching in the synagogue, the people of Nazareth are astonished and say, "Is not this the Tekton, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" The word Tekton is usually translated as carpenter, but the Greek word does not mean carpenter specifically. It means craftsman, builder, one who works with materials. In 1st century Galilee, the primary building material was not wood, it was stone. The region was full of limestone quarries, and most construction, from houses to synagogues to city walls, was built from stone. A Tekton in Nazareth was most likely a stoneworker, a builder who constructed homes, walls, foundations, and agricultural structures like olive presses and wine vats. This is not a romantic profession, it is back-breaking labor. It is the kind of work that cracks your hands, bends your back, and embeds dust in your skin. And this is what the Son of God did for 18 years. But there is more. Nazareth in the 1st century was not a town. It was a village of perhaps 200 to 400 people. It had no recorded public buildings of significance. It was so obscure that the Old Testament never mentions it. It was so small that Nathanael, one of Jesus' own future disciples, would later ask, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" But 4 miles north of Nazareth, something extraordinary was happening. The Roman client king Herod Antipas was building a city called Sepphoris. It was his capital of Galilee, a massive construction project that would transform a small settlement into a Roman-style metropolis with a theatre, a basilica, paved streets, an aqueduct, and luxurious villas with intricate mosaic floors. The construction of Sepphoris began around the year 3 before the Common Era and continued for decades. It was one of the largest building projects in the region during the exact years Jesus was growing up in Nazareth. Sepphoris was a walking distance from Nazareth, 4 miles, less than a 2-hour walk, and it required thousands of skilled laborers, stoneworkers, builders, Tektons. It is almost certain that Jesus and Joseph worked on the construction of Sepphoris. The village of Nazareth could not have sustained a full-time builder. There were not enough projects, but Sepphoris, a major Roman city, being built from the ground up just over the hill, would have provided years of steady work for any Tekton willing to make the daily walk. This changes everything about how you see the lost years. Jesus did not spend 18 years in mystical meditation on a mountaintop. He spent them in the dust and sweat of a construction site. He hauled stone, he measured foundations, he worked alongside Roman laborers and Gentile foremen. He built walls and floors and arches for a city that would become the administrative center of the very empire that would one day crucify him. He worked for Herod Antipas, the son of the same Herod who tried to kill him as an infant. Every morning, he walked 4 miles to a job site. Every evening, he walked 4 miles home. For 18 years. This is not a gap in the story. This is the story. Now let us look at what Jesus would have learned in those years. Not from gurus in distant lands, but from the daily life of a first-century Jewish village. First, the Jewish educational system. In first-century Galilee, Jewish boys typically began their formal education around age 5 or 6 in what was called Bet Sefer, the house of the book. Here they learned to read and write using the Torah as their textbook. By age 10, most boys had memorized the entire book of Genesis and Exodus. Those who showed aptitude continued to Bet Midrash, the house of interpretation, where they studied the prophets, the writings, and the oral traditions. The very best students, those with exceptional ability and religious devotion, might be selected to study under a recognized rabbi in what was called the yoke of the Torah. This was the path that produced scholars like the Apostle Paul, who studied under Gamaliel in Jerusalem. But most boys did not continue past the age of 12 or 13. By that age, most entered their father's trade. Jesus, as the eldest son of a Tekton, would have been expected to learn Joseph's craft. But Luke tells us that at age 12, Jesus was already in the temple, amazing the teachers with his questions and answers. This means that before he entered the workshop, he had already mastered the scriptures at a level that astonished the scholars of Jerusalem. He did not need to go to India to learn wisdom. He had already absorbed the entire Hebrew Bible by the age of 12. And for the next 18 years, he did not stop studying. In a culture where the synagogue was the center of community life, where the Torah was read publicly every Sabbath, where religious discussion was the primary form of intellectual engagement, Jesus would have continued to study and teach in the synagogue of Nazareth every single week. The people of Nazareth were not strangers to him when he began his public ministry. They had heard him teach for years. That is why they say in Mark 6, "Where did this man get these things? What is the wisdom given to him?" They were not asking because they had never heard him speak. They were asking because the carpenter they had known for 20 years was suddenly saying things that surpassed anything they had ever heard from him before. The authority had shifted, the same voice, but now backed by something they had never witnessed: miracles. Second, family life. The Gospels tell us that Jesus had 4 brothers: James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon, and at least 2 sisters, though their names are not recorded. This means that Mary and Joseph had at least 7 children. Joseph likely died at some point during the lost years, because by the time Jesus begins his ministry, he is referred to as the son of Mary, not the son of Joseph, which in that culture typically meant the father had died. If Joseph died when Jesus was in his late teens or early 20s, then as the eldest son, Jesus would have become the head of the household. He would have been responsible for providing for his mother, his 4 brothers, and at least 2 sisters. He would have managed the family finances. He would have negotiated contracts for construction work. He would have made decisions about the family's religious observance, their dietary practices, their social obligations. He was not a solitary mystic wandering the world. He was a firstborn son, carrying the weight of an entire family on his shoulders while working a physically demanding trade. Third, the cultural world of Galilee. Galilee in the 1st century was not a backwater. It was a crossroads. The Via Maris, the ancient trade route connecting Egypt to Mesopotamia, ran directly through Galilee. Merchants, soldiers, pilgrims, and officials from every corner of the Roman Empire passed through the region regularly. Jesus grew up hearing Aramaic, Greek, and possibly some Latin. He encountered Romans, Greeks, Samaritans, Phoenicians, and travelers from as far as Parthia and Arabia. He did not need to travel the world to understand the world. The world traveled through his backyard. Every parable Jesus told in his ministry draws on the real world he lived in during the lost years. The farmer sowing seed, the woman kneading dough, the shepherd searching for a lost sheep, the merchant finding a pearl, the builder calculating the cost of a tower, the fisherman sorting the catch. These are not abstract metaphors borrowed from Eastern philosophy. They are the sights, sounds, and rhythms of daily life in 1st century Galilee. When Jesus said, "Which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost?" he was not quoting a philosopher. He was describing what he had done as a builder for 18 years. When he said, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest," he was not speaking as a distant deity who had never experienced exhaustion. He was speaking as a man who had hauled stone up a hill in the Galilean sun since he was a teenager. Now here is the cipher. The silence of the lost years is not an accident. It is a theological statement, and once you see it, you will see it everywhere in Scripture. God consistently hides his greatest preparation in the most ordinary seasons of life. Moses spent 40 years as a shepherd in Midian before God called him to lead Israel out of Egypt. David spent years tending sheep and fleeing through the wilderness before he became king. Elijah appears out of nowhere with no recorded genealogy or backstory to confront the prophets of Baal. John the Baptist lived in the desert until the day of his public appearance. Amos was not a prophet's son. He was a shepherd and a dresser of sycamore figs. The pattern is consistent. God does not waste the hidden years. He uses them to form character, to build resilience, to develop the deep roots that will sustain the public calling when it finally comes. The years of invisibility are not empty. They are the foundation. And in the life of Jesus, those 18 years of manual labor and family responsibility were forming something that no mystical journey could produce. The ability to speak with authority, not because he had visited distant temples, but because he had lived the full weight of human experience. He knew what it meant to wake up tired, to work with hands that ached, to provide for a family when money was tight, to bury a father, to comfort a grieving mother, to face the contempt of religious leaders who thought a builder had no right to teach. Every sermon he preached, every parable he told, every healing he performed was shaped by those 18 years. The lost years are not lost. They are the raw material of the greatest ministry in history. And there is one more layer. The number itself matters. Jesus appears in the temple at age 12. He begins his ministry at age 30. 18 years of obscurity. In the Bible, the number 18 is connected to the concept of bondage and deliverance. In Judges chapter 3, the Israelites serve Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years before God raises up Ehud to deliver them. In Luke chapter 13, Jesus himself mentions 18 people who were killed when the tower in Siloam fell on them. The number appears at moments of waiting, of suffering under a weight, of living under an authority that is not God's final authority. 18 years of working under the Roman economic system, building a city for a Herod, laboring in a world that did not recognize its own creator. And then, at 30, the yoke breaks. The heavens open, the Spirit descends, the Father speaks. "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." The silence ends, not because Jesus finally found the right teacher, but because the preparation was complete. The builder was ready to build something no stone could hold, a kingdom not made with hands. If you have ever felt like your hidden years were wasted, if you have ever wondered whether God could use the ordinary seasons of your life, look at Jesus. The creator of the universe spent 18 years laying stone in the dust of Galilee. He did not skip the preparation. He did not bypass the ordinary. He entered it fully, and he sanctified every moment of it. Your hidden years are not lost. They are the foundation of everything God will build through you. If this video helped you see the lost years of Jesus in a new light, subscribe and hit the bell. Bible Cipher decodes the patterns no one explains, so you can understand the word for yourself. Next, we are going to decode the cipher hidden in the genealogy of Jesus, and why the 4 women Matthew included were the last people any first-century reader would have expected. I will see you there.